And I feel like we need to do that. We need to have better collaboration. And this is something that I learned in consulting. Everybody's very focused on what's in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think we need to force people to take a step back and say, look, what you do has an impact on the folks over here and is impacted by the folks over there. And we are all operating in a silo. And yeah, it's important that you think the thing you do is really important, but you need to understand how you look at it.
Welcome to the Risk Never Sleeps podcast, in which we learn about the people that are on the front lines, protecting patient safety and delivering patient care. I'm Ed Gaudet, the host of the program, and today I am pleased to be joined by Jeffrey Wheatman of Black Kite. Jeff, how are you, sir?
You know what, Ed? If I were any better, I'd need to be two people. I'm doing great.
Coming off a vacation never hurts.
Yeah, but you know what? To be fair, that's pretty much always my answer. I learned a long time ago, if you act in a positive, upbeat way, that stuff is brought to you. If you act misery, that's what you get.
Laws of attraction and manifestation of the universe. I agree.
Yep.
100%. And since you brought it up, I get to bring this up a little bit there and show the listeners that, all you need is music. All you need is music.
There you go.
And love.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's start off with telling our listeners a little bit about your organization, your current role at Black Kite.
Yeah. So Black Kite is a third-party risk intelligence platform. Essentially, we gather a ridiculous amount of data. We run it through some amazing algorithms we've created, and we feed that intelligence into third-party supply chain and vendor risk management programs. So essentially, we tell people where their exposures are from cyber in their extended ecosystem. So that's what we do. I am actually, so my official title is Senior Vice President Cyber Risk Strategist, but essentially what I am is I am a spokesmodel for Black Kite. So I do a lot of presenting. I host my own podcast, which Ed was on. I don't think it's been put up yet. I do a lot of events. I am very active on LinkedIn, so you definitely connect to me. And essentially, I think about stuff and I get to talk about the stuff I think about. It's actually a really fun job.
Yeah. And how did you get here? Tell us a little bit about your journey, which I always find fascinating.
Yeah. So I was working in a hardware store, like selling plumbing and electronics. And I was miserable, and I was coming home every night, and I was a miserable person to be around. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm interested in computers. I was always kind of handy, I think we talked a little bit about sort of our first computer when we chatted. And I put myself through a Novell Network training class. I'm dating myself. It was like Novell Network 3.11.
Oh, wow.
And it was much more fun than retail. I stepped in a job where I was managing a team. I spent some time in consulting, and then I was working for a company I was doing network engineering stuff. They were going to get bought, and all of a sudden the business dried up, and I stumbled across a website called 2600. Mm-hmm. And I put myself through what is now called pen testing. At the time, I don't know what it was called.
You are an autodidact, sir.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
me.
I am. Yeah. You know what? I think most people who are good at what we do very much take that pathway.
Life learners.
Yes. So I basically taught myself how to do pen testing, and it was way more interesting than what I was doing at the time. And I decided, okay, I'm a security guy. And I've gotten very lucky in my career. I always tell people when I mentor them, you got to figure out how to do the job they hired you for before they figure out you didn't know how to do the job they hired you for. Right. And that's sort of
the great imposter syndrome. Yeah. Exactly. So true.
And I spent some time in consulting, and I learned pretty quickly. I was not a great pen tester. I was a really good social engineer, and the part of social engineering is about talking to people and getting them to sort of believe you and buy into it. And I realized that was sort of where my skill was. And then I spent 15 years working for an industry analyst firm.
One of the best.
Yeah, Gartner. I mean, I know what I'm saying it, and I learned a lot there, and I had a great time, and I'm still very friendly with a lot of people over there. And after 15 years, I think it kind of ran its course, and I was covering the market where Black Kite plays, and I got off the phone with Paul Paget, who is now my boss, and said to my wife, I think I can help them. And I reached out to Paul and I said, hey, I love what you guys are doing at Black Kite. I think you can really kill in this market. I would like to help you do that. He agreed. And I actually just hit my 3-year anniversary last week.
Oh, congrats. So, yeah, Paul's awesome. And he's a South Shore guy like myself. And I've known Paul for a number of years. And, and we're in full disclosure, Sensinet is a Black Kite partner.
We love it. So love it.
We love Black Kite. We love Black Kite.
Yeah.
And so. Awesome. How did the Gartner experience frame your ability to see new technologies and stay ahead of where maybe people hadn't considered what was emerging in over the next 24 months or so?
A great question. I think there's kind of 3 or 4 things that I sort of learned there. So one was Gartner attracts really, really smart people. And I'm going to say this on recording and hopefully my wife will listen. It was the first place in my whole career I didn't think I was the smartest person in the room. Mm. And I love that, right? Mark Cuban says if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right.
So I really learned how to think about problems and think around problems. I learned how to ask questions and actually listen for the answers. Mm. I learned how to take a lot of information and kind of synthesize it into, all right, so I spoke to 100 people who all have this problem, and here are the things that seem to work and here are the things that don't, and I can use that sort of to coach. I also, I always said, and you and I talked about this when we chatted last week, founders and technology people should generally not be the CEO or head of marketing, right? They're technology people. They should be the idea people. And I think that one of the things I learned was that because the best technology doesn't always win, right? We know that.
Right.
You have to have an actual solution to a problem that other people have. I think sometimes people go, "Ooh, I got this great thing." And I go, that is great. You answered a question that 6 people have. Mm-hmm. There's no business there.
Yeah.
Right? So that was part of it. And I learned how to kind of identify trends. One of the things that I do with Paul and the rest of the executive team at Black Kite is I bring in and go, okay, so here's what we're doing. Here's where I'm seeing sort of winds blow, right? I just got off a catamaran, so I'm going to talk about some winds. And I began to realize that I don't like to call myself a forecaster or a prognosticator or a predictor, because I don't really like any of those terms. But you look back and you see things that have happened, and then you look at some of the things that happen as a result. And I think you can make some assumptions. And I think based on those assumptions, you can sort of make certain suggestions. And I'm a big fan of, have you thought about it this way, as opposed to you should do this? And I think those are a lot of the things that I learned. And I also learned how to read an audience. And when that audience is one person on the other end of an inquiry call, or whether it's being on stage in front of 5,000 people and realizing that everyone's looking at their phones, which means I'm not doing what they need me to do, which is engage them. So being able to read an audience and sort of react. And one of the things I do at Black Kite is I run our customer advisory board, and I ran the first one, and Chris Bush, who is our COO, who's a brilliant guy, came up to me afterwards and he said, "I love the way you pivot." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we were talking, and somebody said something, and you kind of said, 'Ooh, that's interesting,' and you moved us in a different direction, and no one realized it was happening. But we ended up with a conversation that wasn't really going anywhere into something that actually turned out to be really valuable and productive, and actually had a big impact on some decisions that we made over the 12 months after that."
You have this high functioning real-time pattern matching algorithm that you draw upon.
So I think you just accused me of being an artificial intelligence.
You might be.
Let's hope not.
Isn't that what we're doing? Building? I mean, someone has to have that ability to build it, right? So
yeah.
No, and I find that that's such a rare trait and characteristic. And I mean, as humans, we can pattern match. Obviously, it's one of the things we do. But doing it in real time and, like you said, pivoting in a way that leverages both your creative brain and your logic brain is really interesting. I think so.
Yeah. I just changed my background.
I saw you did that. I saw you. I like that.
You got one. You got one. I got one. So without anyone in the audience knowing, I literally just left my home and went to the office.
Nobody knew. We'll cut that out. We'll actually cut that piece. All right. No, very good. Very good. So as you think about the next 24 months, what are your priorities? What are you looking at?
So I'm always trying to figure out sort of, this sounds altruistic, but I want to help. I want to make the world a safer place. And, I've been doing this for 30 years now. And I believe that third-party risk, vendor risk, supply chain risk may be the hardest problem we've ever had to face. Mm-hmm. And we just had our company kick off and my boss always has me sort of kick off day 2. And I talked about 5 sort of trends. And the first one is really this sphere of ownership problem, right? We talk to people in a bank and they go, oh yeah, third-party risk is owned by the CISO. And then you talk to a company just like them and they say, no, procurement owns it, or, legal owns it, or compliance owns it. So really, one of the things I'm working on is how do we tell a story that resonates with different audiences? So if your listeners and viewers out there are familiar with the old R.L. Stine kind of build your own adventure stories, right? Do you open the door? Do you walk down the hall? Do you pick the thing up or do you not? And I feel like I want to try to build a story that starts with, look, there's a big exposure and a risk because of people you do business with. And here are some things that you should look at and kind of, at the end of the story, veer off and say, okay, well, here are things you should talk about. Mm-hmm. The second thing is trying to understand, because like what we do is, I don't want to say it's niche, but it's a fairly narrow but important element of this sort of third-party supply chain, third-party risk problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out, we touch up against threat intel, we touch up against GRC, we touch up against risk, we touch up against security operations. And we can't be all things to all people, because when I was an analyst, that's what I used to tell a vendor. If you tell people you solve all their problems, they don't want to do business with you, because you really can't, unless you're a huge, $50 billion company. And even those guys don't necessarily.
No, yeah, exactly.
So I feel like trying to understand kind of where we fit and where we provide value. And I'm not just talking about Black Kite, I'm talking about the market we are in.
Yeah. Like creating an adjacency map for the market, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you know, the market we're in has a little bit of a reputation for, being, a little kind of, sniperish or sort of, kind of blackmail as a service kind of thing. So we're also trying to change the perception, right?
Do you mean like
extortion as a service?
Or ambulatory chasing, like you had a breach and you need to use this?
And
I agree. That's like the wrong way.
Yeah, I feel like we have an opportunity to really make everyone safer. Like I'm a big fan of the wagging your finger and going, you better fix this, or I'm going to wag my finger very aggressively next time. Yeah. I don't think that works. I think we need to make it easier for us as procurers of services, as well as making it easy for the folks on the other end of it, right? We don't want to send you a report with 50,000 things you need to fix. What we want to be able to do is send you a report, do these 5 things, and you'll be better off than you were before you did the 5 things. Yeah. And I feel like we need to do that. We need to have better collaboration. And this is something that I learned in consulting. Everybody's very focused on what's in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think we need to force people to take a step back and say, look, what you do has an impact on the folks over here and is impacted by the folks over there. And we are all operating in a silo. And it's important that you think the thing you do is really important, but you need to understand how you look at it sort of more widely. I always use, there's an old parable called The Blind Man and the Elephant. And I won't tell the whole thing. I encourage your listeners to look it up. But it's really the sort of moral there is you got to step away from the problem in order to see the bigger picture. And I think we don't always do a great job of that. So those are kind of the things that I'm working on. And then just sort of as a side thing, which isn't necessarily 100% related to what I do, I believe we have a serious problem with communication. I don't think we as security practitioners do a good job communicating with our business stakeholders. We are terrible at going in front of the board of directors. We are terrible at talking to CEOs, et cetera. And I do a lot of coaching in that area. I do a lot of presentations. One of my favorite presentations I get to do is called Don't Bore Your Board. Because I've been in front of well over 100 boards, and I've coached hundreds of CISOs and CIOs go in front of the boards. And they walk out, we walk out, and the board goes, man, I hope we don't have to talk to those people again.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of on a one-person agenda to change that. And baby steps, incremental change. And I think we're getting better.
I like that word too, bore, because, it could be several meanings there. It's obviously don't make your board disinterested with what you're saying, engage, make it engaging and put it in language, but also don't bore a hole.
Yep. I like
through
that.
their head by going too far down the technical, hole. And I think that also, this notion of boring is really interesting. Play on words. You're spot on.
It's tough too, because we come from a background, right? Most of us come from the technology background. And when we feel stressed or we get put under pressure, that's where we go.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything more stressful than being in front of the board of directors.
It can be a stressful moment. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're spot on. I love that focus. I also think, there's the putting it and framing it in a way that's right for the audience, which you talked about earlier. That adjacency map obviously is an important view of that as well, because there's many constituents and stakeholders along the path. And then there's also this notion, it's a different dimension, but I think it's equally important, of transformation. Because what we're doing is really forcing change. And if you don't have that executive sponsorship or business sponsorship, right, people further downstream don't really want to change things. And everyone fears change. It's just natural. It's a natural human emotion or reaction to change. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So I agree. And I many years ago, I worked with a guy. He was a CISO for a federal government agency. I won't say which, but he said to me, look, he said, I'm competing with budget with people who buy light bulbs. And that was like eye-opening for me, because if I'm the person who's buying light bulbs and I go, here's the thing, brah, if you don't give me money, you're sitting in the dark. That's a pretty clear connection. But if I'm the security person, I say, so I need $5 million. And my boss says, well, what if I don't give it to you? And you go, think something real bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
The boss is going to say, well, how bad? You go, real bad. When they say, how soon? And you go, pretty soon. They're going to give the money to the guy buying light bulbs, right?
Yeah. It goes back to that notion of storytelling. Like,
the connection is just not there.
The latter is not a good movie. You don't want to watch the movie because, but the former, everyone knows the movie, right? It's a horror film. You don't want to be in the dark.
Yeah. And I think that we need to continue to revisit, and we need to continue to ask questions. And I'll give a little tidbit out to your listeners. Here's a question you never ask your board. Does that make sense to you? Because that is hugely pedantic and insulting. Instead, what you want to say is, does this help you make better decisions?
Exactly.
Is there anything in and around this that you don't want to know, or that maybe you want to know more about?
Exactly. What do you need? Right.
And I think it's a problem. And unfortunately, with the way the economy is, we're sort of in one of those phases, and it ebbs and flows, and it's been doing this for 30 years. I feel like we're at a point now where the driver is compliance, because when things get a little bit tight, I think people don't necessarily, there's no ROI for most security investment. It just is what it is.
Yeah, it's a cost center. I mean, until something bad happens, and then it's not.
Right. So I've been hearing from a lot of my friends and a lot of CISOs that the driver for investment is back to compliance, and I think we need to move away from that. And I'm a big fan. Michael Porter, who everyone knows him for the 5 forces in marketing, but he also did this great work around the concept of value chains, which is, in a nutshell, for a security person, right? So we have a technology. The technology combines together to perform a function from an application. The application fits into a business process. The business process supports a business goal, which is linked back to what you were measured on at the end of the year, Mr. or Miss CEO. Well, if we don't pay attention over here, we go through this value chain and you have this thing, right? So as a simple example, if we don't assess the security posture of our third parties and they get hit with ransomware and they're down for a week, how long are we down for? Right. And I actually just posted something, and I'm okay talking about it because it was from a few years ago, but there was a logistics company in the UK, 156-year-old company got hit with ransomware, and they were out of business in 45 days.
Whoa.
Now, they did some very, very bad things and they got caught. But imagine I'm using that logistics company to ship raw material. I can't get raw material into my facility. I can't manufacture. I can't combine those raw materials. I then don't have product to ship to the store, and I now make less money. Maybe I miss my target for the quarter. Why? Because someone on whom I depended didn't do the right thing and I was exposed. And that's just a simple articulation of that kind of value chain.
Yeah. You do have to put it in terms the business understands. And if you can make it an enabler versus an enforcer, obviously that's a better experience when it comes to investments and getting resources.
And, I'm reminded, so a number of years ago, I did a toolkit when I was an analyst, and it's actually probably the best thing I did. And it was an outcropping from an attempt I want to come up with a 1-page security strategy. And I realized I couldn't do that, but I was able to come with 5 slides. And one of the slides was a list of risks. And I sent it around to a bunch of my colleagues, and one of the colleagues came back and said, all of these risks seem to be very negative. And I said, well, of course. And she said, well, have you thought about casting some of them that if we manage this risk, here are the good things that will happen? And that was lightbulb over my head. And I now coach people, if you're going to go to your executives with a list of 10 risks, 5 of them should be positive, right? If we do a good job assessing the risk of our third parties, we'll be able to onboard them more rapidly. We'll be able to identify single points of failure. We'll be able to prepare for the worst. We'll be able to build resistance, as opposed to the flip side, which is if we don't assess the risk and they get hit with ransomware, we're going to lose $10 million.
Yeah.
2 different stories, same situation though.
Yeah, that acceleration of adoption and implementation is in that enabler value chain, which I think is really, really important. We talked about the dark earlier. What keeps you up at night?
AI scares the bejesus out of me. I almost just said a little bit of a bad word.
Why?
I'm a little bit of a pessimist, so keep that in mind. I believe there is a possible future, where it's a Terminator or a Matrix scenario. I don't know, maybe 10 years out or maybe 50 years out, but I believe that when AI figures out how dumb people are, and let's face it, we're pretty dumb, I think they may push us out of the way. But I know that's a little cliche, but I do think, and there was an interesting article in the New York Times the other day about the fact that a lot of very senior AI researchers, they have concerns over the way this stuff is being used. There's an I think Asimov story that I can't remember the name of, but it's about a far future where people are so reliant on computers they don't know how to do basic mathematics. And what I'll do is I'll get the name of the story and I'll share it with you, and you can put it up when this goes up, because I think it's a lesson to be learned. And you and I have been around for a while. We understand what goes on at the lower level, at least to a certain extent. And I don't think like the Gen X and Gen Z, I don't think they do. And I think that we're going to sort of run up to a situation where when stuff starts to break, we're going to have less and less people who actually know how to fix it. Right.
It's a good point.
The other thing that keeps me awake is the fact that in spite of doing this for so long and coaching CISOs and coaching chief risk officers and CIOs, I don't feel like we've gotten that much better about communication. There's a CISO, Drew Simonis, who I am connected to on LinkedIn. He's a really smart guy. And he posted something about having the same conversations over and over. And I said, here's why, Drew. We are having the same conversations with ourselves. We already know there's a problem. You know who we're not having the conversation with? The people whose assets we have to help them protect. With the people who actually have to decide where to allocate resources, limited dollars, people, process, tools. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're having the effective conversation with those people. And that worries me, and it makes me nervous. And we keep having these conversations. We're not communicating well. I talk to all of these security people, and they tell me, "Oh no, I communicate great." Well, I have news for you, sir or ma'am. I'm talking to your bosses, and you're not as good at it as you think you are. I think those are the things.
That's a great point.
And then finally, I'm a little worried about the world we're leaving for our kids. I got kids. My youngest is 19. My oldest is 26. A little concerned about the world we're leaving them. That's not really a cybersecurity problem necessarily, but that is something to worry about.
It's all connected. Unfortunately, it's a lot more connected than it was 2 decades ago. So outside of your current job, what would you be doing? What are you most passionate about?
So I'm a huge reader. I love reading. I actually love sci-fi and fantasy. I love stuff that sort of allows me to disconnect. And I think sci-fi in particular is something that gets me to think of. I actually have a presentation entitled, and it has not been picked up anywhere. So anyone listening, if you're looking, and I'm very good on stage, it is called Jean-Luc Picard, Muad'dib, and Dixie Flatline. Critical leadership we can learn from classic sci-fi characters. So if anyone wants me to do that, I will deliver it.
I love that.
I have a draft of it right now. I could probably finish it if someone told me I needed to come deliver it. But I feel like that helps us think. I actually just recently picked up scuba diving. I actually just got scuba certified, largely in anticipation of the trip we just took off. So I like that.
What was the most interesting you saw or experienced during your trip from a scuba diving perspective? Something that you weren't prepared for, like something that kind of made you go, wow, that was...
Yes. So I don't know when this is going to go up, but while we were away was when there was a rescue of astronauts who were stuck on the space station. So we were laying up on the deck at night, just kind of smoking cigars and chatting. And we actually saw what we thought was a shooting star. And then we realized it was actually the rocket heading to space station. So that was cool.
That is very cool.
When I was a kid, I was a really big astronomy and space buff. Mm-hmm. And I am still blown away when you lay down and you look at the stars and you go, holy shit, that light left there millions, tens of millions of years ago. And it makes me feel very small, which I love. Because if you ask anyone that knows me well, they know I can sort of get a little big-headed, but I love that perspective.
That's so interesting. I was outside the other night and it was just really clear. And I was out talking to my daughter. I happened to look up at the sky and it had that moment, like you just mentioned, like that moment where you go, whoa, it's just so clear and beautiful, and everything is so present and yet so distant. It's just, it's an amazing wake up call, I guess, for us.
Yeah. And then the other final thing I learned. So, we have this big boat and there's all kinds of electronics and we know where we're going, and there are mooring balls that you attach to, and there's all this navigation. And we were just talking about how really as recently as 100 years ago, tips how to navigate without a lot of that electronic gear.
Yeah.
And you hear the stories in history about all these explorers who literally roamed the world. They had very little knowledge of what they were going to come up against, and that kind of blows me away. What historically what people have been able to do without the technology that we have become so dependent upon.
Yeah, all the radar. And I remember we were on a boat, I think it was last year, and I was just concerned about where we were headed. So I literally downloaded an app on my phone. And I was able to navigate. It was crazy. So love that. What would you, if you go back in time, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Don't doubt yourself so much. I spent so much of my early life questioning, we talked about imposter syndrome. Do I really belong in that room? Are my thoughts really that valuable, that important? And I think that's really what I would tell myself. And then I also would tell myself what I tell my kids, which is we collectively as human beings need to be much more mindful of how our actions impact others. And I put something up on LinkedIn about it a couple weeks ago. Somebody was driving through my community. She just pulled over in the side of the road, opened their door, got out, left the door open. And I'm like, that person literally didn't think about anybody else. And I think it's a hard thing for young people to understand.
Yeah.
But you're not alone in the world. Everything you do has an impact, however small, on other people for good or bad. And I think we need to start thinking about that. So I think those are some of the things I would tell myself. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life. I tell people all the time, everything I've done, good or bad, every mistake I've made have gotten me right here, right now. And I love my life. I love my job. I have a great family. I have a lot of friends, more than I think I probably deserve or ever expected to have. Yeah. So I don't look back and go, oh, I wish I didn't, or I wish I did. Every mistake got me right here with you today.
Amen. What's the riskiest thing you've ever done? Got to ask that question. Risk Never Sleeps podcast.
Yeah, the riskiest thing I've ever done.
That motorcycle trip to Sturgis. What about that?
No, yeah, I did have a motorcycle accident, but honestly, the riskiest thing I ever did, I owned an apartment in Brooklyn when the real estate market was spiking back in the day. I sold my apartment. I took all the money and I put it into a margin stock, and I lost all of it. Ooh. Yeah. So I don't invest my own money anymore. I apparently buy high and sell low is not a good investment strategy, either short or long term. So that's probably the dumbest thing.
Buy high and sell low. I love that.
Yeah. And then I've done some risky stuff that I don't really feel comfortable sharing out loud or on video.
Okay, good. Fair enough.
Yeah. So I still have to act as a guide.
You do,
kids.
You do. You got to have that filter. So you're on a desert island. What 5 records, albums, or movies would you bring with you?
Okay. The Princess Bride would be definitely one of the movies.
Nice. Yeah.
So I'll give you kind of different things. If it was a book, So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think if I only have one thing to read, it would be the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which is technically 7 books,
nice.
But it's one long story, so that's a cheat.
Yep.
An album. Wow, that's a tough one. So without thinking too hard, Temple of the Dog.
Oh,
yeah, which to me is a perfect album. Every song on that album is great.
Yeah, I don't hear that often.
Yeah, no, it's not as well known. All right, so we got our book, TV show. I think
Hunger Strike's on that album, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, with dual vocals of Eddie Vedder and the late great Chris Cornell.
So good.
Yeah, I'm actually going to see Pearl Jam at the end of April, and believe it or not, first time ever.
Oh, yeah.
I'll cheer
nice.
I had tickets for a show that I didn't go to.
Oh.
The Red Hot Chili Peppers were the headliner. The Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam were the openers.
Oh.
And the 2 guys I was going with, one got stuck late at work and the other guy didn't feel well. And instead of going by myself, I stayed home. And that was before Pearl Jam and the Smashing Pumpkins blew up. But anyway, all right. So TV show, going to say Breaking Bad, I think, might be my number one show. And then my favorite food, right? So it's 5 things: chicken parmesan, everlasting chicken parmesan. So those are the 5 things.
Very good. And
so the eating chicken parm, reading The Dark Tower, listening to Temple of the Dog, and then as I lay down, I watch Breaking Bad.
I love it.
So
all right. So you mentioned authors. You ever read any Neil Stephenson?
Yes. So I love some of his earlier stuff. I love Cryptonomicon.
Dude. Greatest book ever written, by the way, Cryptonomicon. I'm so glad not many people know about that book. And I think it's security professionals. Everyone should read it. It's so good.
And what's funny is, he was a former programmer. And, he actually wrote a sort of, I guess, a white paper called "In the Beginning Was the Command Line" or something like that. I love Diamond Age. I love his stuff. He just got so overly technical as his sort of career went on, and I kind of just bailed. But I do like his stuff.
Shout out.
So and actually I have a recommendation actually for folks out there. If you guys like fantasy, there is a series of books called Dungeon Crawler Carl. 7 of them are out so far. The writer thinks there are going to be 10. It is a humorous take on kind of gaming and fantasy. And
Ready Player One? Sounds like Ready Player One there.
Yeah, I like it better than Ready Player One, although Will Wheaton did a great job on the audiobook. But the guy that does the audiobooks is a guy named Jeff Hayes. The first book, I thought it was an entire cast. It's one dude who does every voice. So
what is it called again? Please?
It's called Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman.
Dungeon Crawler Carl. Awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds like a D&D story
really good.
A little bit.
So in a nutshell, it's a genre called lit RPG, which is literary role-playing game. There's some aliens take over the earth, and they basically shove all these humans into this dungeon, and it's that story, and it's really good. I love it. I'm actually on my second read through right now.
Did you ever read the Elf Stones or the Sword of Shannara? That series.
I have read those books.
Terry Brooks, I think, is still.
Yeah. Terry Brooks is good. I'll tell you, the most overrated one, Wheel of Time. Read the first 2 books, didn't get it. I got halfway through the 3rd book, and I went, you know what? I don't actually really care about anything that's going on, and I put it down. I know people love it, and I know that's a very polarizing opinion, but not my type.
And there you have it. Why don't we just end right there? That's beautiful. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for your time and joining the podcast today. This is Ed Gaudet from the Risk Never Sleeps podcast. If you're on the front lines protecting patient care and delivering patient care and protecting patient safety, or however that goes when I do the outro, remember to stay vigilant because risk never sleeps.